When you hear the word management, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it spreadsheets? Endless meetings? Something kind of boring? Well, let's try to flip that idea on its head. Because management is really the hidden engine behind pretty much every single great human achievement. Seriously, from building the pyramids to launching rockets. So, let's pull back the curtain and see how this engine actually works.
I mean, think about it for a second. We all have ideas, right? But what is that secret sauce that turns a cool concept into something real, something you can actually touch, especially when you need hundreds or even thousands of people all working together on it? How do you possibly coordinate all of that effort?
Well, the answer is what we call the management process. And it's not just one thing. It's a continuous cycle that takes all your resources, we're talking people, money, time, skills, and methodically turns them into the goal you're trying to reach. You can think of it as the operating system for achievement.
All right, so let's start with the big why. Why is this engine so absolutely essential? Why can't a bunch of really smart people just get in a room and, figure it out as they go?
Well, simply put, because the world is messy and unpredictable. The management process brings a bit of order to all that chaos. It helps organizations look down the road to try and anticipate what's coming, which cuts down on uncertainty. It makes sure that your different teams, say legal and IT, aren't accidentally working against each other, but are perfectly in sync. And maybe most importantly, it creates accountability, making sure everyone knows what they're responsible for and that the whole project stays on track.
So if we're going to build this organizational machine, where do we start? Well, like any big project, it all begins with the blueprint. That's the thinking and structuring part of the process, what we call planning and organizing.
First up, you plan. This is the thinking function. You start by setting a super clear objective. What are we actually trying to do here? Then you develop premises, which are really just your educated guesses about the future. You might assume interest rates will stay low, for example. From there, you brainstorm all the different ways you could get there. You pick the best path and you build a solid plan to make it happen. It's your roadmap from point A to point B.
But look, a great plan is totally useless if you don't have a structure to actually execute it. That's where organizing comes in. You figure out all the work that needs doing, you group related tasks into departments, you assign specific duties to specific people, and you set up a clear hierarchy. This whole step is about answering those crucial questions. Who's doing what, and who reports to whom?
This whole idea was summed up perfectly by the legendary management thinker Henry Fayol. He called it the unity of direction principle. It's this simple but profound idea that every single person and every single team working towards a goal needs to be aligned under one leader and one single plan. It's all about getting everyone in the boat rowing in the exact same direction.
Okay, so we've got our blueprint and our structure, but a machine, no matter how well designed, is just a pile of metal without any fuel. And in any organization, that fuel, well, that's its people. So let's talk about how we power this engine up. This is the next huge question, right? You can have the best plan in the world, but how do you get talented people to not just show up for work, but to actually be energized, committed, and passionate about making that plan a reality? The answer, of course, is all about motivation. And Hertzberg's theory on this is so interesting. He basically said there are two totally different sets of factors at work. On one side, you've got hygiene factors, things like a decent salary or a safe place to work. Now, if you don't have these, people are miserable. But here's the twist. If you do have them, people are just not miserable. They're neutral. They don't make you love your job. True motivation, he said, comes from motivators. Things like feeling recognized, a sense of real achievement, and chances to grow. That's what actually creates satisfaction.
Then there's Vroom's expectancy theory, which gives us this powerful little formula to think about it. It says your motivation is a product of three things. First is expectancy, which is the belief, if I actually work harder, can I hit that target? Second is instrumentality. Okay, if I hit the target, will I really get that promised bonus? And last is valence. How much do I even care about getting that bonus anyway? And here's the kicker. Since it's a multiplication formula, if your belief in any of those three is a 0, your total motivation is 0.
So to actually motivate people effectively, managers need the full picture, right? That's where a tool like the 360-degree appraisal comes in. Imagine you've got this lawyer who is an absolute genius on paper, but is just impossible to work with. Their own self-review might be glowing, and maybe their boss loves their results, but when you get feedback from their peers and the people who work for them, you suddenly see this huge collaboration problem. Now HR knows exactly what to work on.
Okay, so our team is motivated and ready to go. Now it's time for action. This is where the manager really steps into the spotlight to drive things forward through leading and communicating. So when you think about leadership, there have historically been two big schools of thought. For the longest time, there was this trait theory, which basically said great leaders are just born that way. They have these innate qualities like charisma or smarts. But the more modern view, based on behavioral theories, says that leadership isn't some kind of magic. It's a set of skills that can absolutely be learned and developed by anyone.
And a manager's job isn't just one thing. They have to wear a ton of different hats. The researcher Mintzberg identified 10 distinct roles, which he grouped into 3 big categories. They have to be interpersonal, acting as a figurehead or a mentor. They have to be informational, keeping an eye on data and acting as a spokesperson. And crucially, they have to be decisional, solving tough problems and deciding where to put resources.
Let's make that real for a second. Imagine a huge crisis hits, like the stock market suddenly crashes. A manager has to instantly switch hats and become a disturbance handler. In that moment, a slow, democratic approach just won't work. The leader might have to become more autocratic, making quick, decisive calls just to stabilize the ship. The situation dictates the leadership style.
And the vehicle that makes all of this leadership and action possible? Communication. But it's so much more than just talking. It's a whole process. A sender has to package an idea into a message, send it through a channel like an email, and then a receiver has to unpack that message, understand it, and ideally, provide some feedback. If there's a breakdown anywhere in that chain, any noise, that whole bridge of meaning can collapse, and progress just grinds to a halt.
All right, last piece of the puzzle. The engine is running, the car is moving, but are we actually going in the right direction? This brings us to the final and absolutely critical function, controlling. This is the organization's feedback loop.
At the very heart of controlling is this beautifully simple but incredibly powerful idea. You start with a standard. That's the goal you set way back in the planning stage. Then you measure what you're actually doing, your actual performance. The gap between those two numbers is your deviation. And that number, it's not just data. It's the most important signal an organization has.
And that's the whole point. If that deviation gets too big, if you're falling way short of your goal, it's not a failure, it's a signal. It's the trigger that tells you it's time to step in and take corrective action to get back on course. This system is basically the organization's real-time dashboard, constantly steering it toward its destination.
Let's watch this all come together in a real-world example. When India's market regulator, SEBI, undertook the massive project of speeding up stock settlements to a one-day, or T+1 system, they followed this process perfectly. First, they planned a 12-month roadmap. Then, they organized a special committee to oversee it. Then, they directed all the market players by issuing new guidelines. And finally, they used controlling. They held monthly reviews checking for failed trades and used that data to make immediate adjustments.
And what that real-world story really hammers home is the most important takeaway of all. Management is not a straight line from start to finish. It's a continuous, living, breathing cycle. You plan, you act, you measure the results, and then those results feed right back into your new plans. It's a perpetual engine for getting things done.
Which, of course, leaves us with a pretty mind-bending question for the future. As AI gets more sophisticated and starts taking on some of these coordinating and analytical tasks, as it basically becomes another member of the team, what is the role of the human manager going to be? What parts of this process will always fundamentally need a human touch? That's something I think we're all going to be figuring out together.